A hospital hallway. The cold kind, the kind where time seems afraid to move, where the lights hum softly and every shadow carries a story no one dares to tell aloud. On the polished floor lies a pregnant woman, her breaths shallow, one trembling hand pressed against her belly, as if she's holding her entire world together with just her fingertips. Nurses rush toward her, but someone reaches her first. Expensive heels, a perfume that enters before she does, a smile carved with cruelty, her husband's mistress. She doesn't ask what happened, she doesn't kneel, she doesn't offer help. Instead, she leans down, her voice colder than the tiles beneath them, and whispers something so venomous, the air itself seems to flinch. Then, with the calmness of a woman who believes she's already won, she nudges the pregnant woman's handbag just out of reach. A quiet gesture of domination, a claim of victory in a war the wife never agreed to fight. The nurses scream for help. Doors burst open. The world blurs into chaos. But this cruel, quiet moment, it will ignite a chain of events that drags a billionaire into the light, exposes a past drenched in secrets, and unleashes a revenge so shocking the entire city will whisper about it for years. Because behind this fall lies a truth someone has already tried to bury, and it all begins right here. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. But what happened after the hospital was far worse. Because while she lay there on that cold floor, fighting for her baby's life, questions were already swirling through the minds of everyone who witnessed it. Why was her husband nowhere to be found? A man who once promised to love her in sickness and in health, suddenly unreachable on the night his wife and unborn child needed him most. Why did the mistress show up at the hospital before anyone else? How did she even know his wife was there? And why did she look so calm, so prepared, as if she'd been waiting for this moment? But here's the part that makes your blood run cold. A billionaire, one of the most powerful men in the state, rushed to that hospital within the hour. Not for business, not for publicity, for her, a woman he'd never publicly acknowledged, a woman whose name had never appeared in his world of boardrooms and country clubs. So the question everyone started asking was simple but terrifying. Why did he care so much? What did he know that no one else did? And what secret were they all trying to bury beneath the sterile white sheets of that hospital room? She thought she knew who her enemies were. The mistress, the betrayal, the lies. She was wrong. Her name was Emma, 32 years old, 7 months pregnant, and if you asked anyone who knew her, they'd tell you she was kind. The type of woman who remembered birthdays, who baked cookies for the neighbors, who always smiled even when her eyes told a different story. She'd been married to Daniel for 4 years, a man who worked in finance, who wore expensive watches and came home late smelling like cologne that wasn't hers. At first, she thought it was just stress, long hours, market volatility, the usual excuses, but then came the signs, the ones you can't unsee once you notice them. He stopped touching her belly when he walked past, stopped asking how she felt, stopped looking her in the eye during dinner. There were nights when his phone would buzz on the nightstand, and he'd grab it so fast you'd think it was on fire. Nights when he'd say he was working late, but she could hear laughter in the background when he called. Female laughter. And then there was the money. Transfers she didn't recognize, payments to accounts with no names attached. When she asked, he'd snap at her, tell her she was being paranoid, hormonal, crazy. So she stopped asking. She withdrew into herself, into the small, quiet world of her unborn daughter, and tried to convince herself that everything would be okay once the baby came, that he'd fall in love again, that they'd be a family. But deep down, in the place where fear lives, she knew he was slipping away. She just didn't know how far he'd already gone, and she had no idea that the woman stealing her husband wasn't just after him. She wanted everything: the house, the name, the life, the child. But the mistress would soon become the least of her worries. Her name was Vanessa, 26, beautiful in the kind of way that demands attention. She grew up in a cramped apartment on the east side, sharing a bedroom with 2 sisters and a mother who cleaned houses for women like Emma. Vanessa learned early that beauty was currency, that men with money were easy to manipulate if you knew what they wanted to hear. And Daniel? Daniel was desperate for someone who didn't ask questions, someone who laughed at his jokes and made him feel young again, someone who didn't remind him of responsibilities he wasn't ready for. Vanessa didn't love him, but she loved what he represented: escape, status, revenge against every woman who'd ever looked down on her. She studied Emma from afar, watched her social media, learned her routines, her vulnerabilities, and slowly, carefully, she began dismantling Emma's life, piece by piece. A text here, a photo there, whispers to Daniel about how Emma didn't appreciate him, how she was trapping him, how he deserved better. And Daniel, weak and selfish, believed every word. He started making promises, told Vanessa he'd leave Emma after the baby was born, that they'd be together, that she'd have everything she ever wanted. But Vanessa had a problem, a big one. She wasn't just acting on her own ambition. Someone was pulling the strings, someone who had their own reasons for wanting Emma out of the picture, someone with money, power, and a grudge that ran deeper than jealousy. And that's when things got dangerous, because Vanessa was being promised things Daniel couldn't deliver, things only someone far wealthier, far more connected, could provide. And the price? Make sure Emma and her baby were no longer a threat. She wasn't acting alone. It was a Tuesday night when Emma's world shattered. She'd been feeling off all day, sharp pains in her abdomen, dizziness. She tried calling Daniel. No answer. She texted. Nothing. She called his office. They said he'd left hours ago. Panic set in. She grabbed her keys, her hospital bag, and headed for the door, but the pain hit her hard. She collapsed in the parking garage of their building, her phone skittering across the concrete. A neighbor found her, called an ambulance, and that's how she ended up on that cold hospital floor, surrounded by strangers, fighting to stay conscious, while her daughter kicked weakly inside her. The nurses rushed her into emergency. Monitors beeped. Voices overlapped. Someone shouted about blood pressure, another about fetal distress. Emma kept asking for Daniel. Where was he? Why wasn't he answering? But no one had answers, only worried glances. Then, through the chaos, she heard heels clicking down the hallway, steady, confident, expensive. And there she was, Vanessa, standing in the doorway like she belonged there, like she had every right to be present at the most terrifying moment of Emma's life. Emma's vision blurred, but she saw the smirk, the cold, satisfied smirk. And she heard the words Vanessa whispered as she knelt down, words no one else could hear, words that would haunt Emma for weeks. He's with me. He's always been with me. And after tonight, you'll have nothing. Then Vanessa stood, adjusted her purse, and calmly nudged Emma's handbag just out of reach. A small, cruel gesture. A reminder that in this moment, Emma was powerless. And Vanessa? Vanessa was in control. But here's what Vanessa didn't know. A nurse named Grace had been watching. Grace had worked in that hospital for 15 years. She'd seen affairs, neglect, abuse, and she knew cruelty when she saw it. So she made a choice. She pulled Emma's handbag back toward her, locked eyes with Vanessa, and said, loud enough for others to hear, "You need to leave. Now." Vanessa didn't argue. She smiled, turned, and walked away. But Grace knew. This wasn't over. Something darker was at play. And Emma was at the center of it. Later that night, after Emma was stabilized and her baby's heartbeat returned to normal, Grace noticed something strange. Someone had tried to access Emma's medical file, someone without authorization. The login was flagged, deleted almost immediately. Grace reported it to her supervisor, but instead of concern, she was met with dismissal. Probably a system glitch, they said. Don't worry about it. But Grace did worry, because the hospital director had been in the hallway earlier, watching, and when Vanessa left, he'd followed her out. They'd spoken briefly near the exit, too briefly, too quietly, and Grace had a sinking feeling that whatever was happening to Emma went far beyond a love triangle. The security cameras in that hallway? Mysteriously turned off. The backup footage? Corrupted. And when Grace tried to bring it up again, she was told to drop it or find another job. And then the billionaire walked in. His name was Richard Montgomery, 71 years old, self-made, ruthless in business but known for his philanthropy. Hospitals, scholarships, veteran programs. He was the kind of man whose presence commanded silence, whose word could end careers or save them. And when he walked into that hospital at 2 in the morning, people noticed. The director personally escorted him to Emma's room. No questions asked, no explanations given. Richard stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching Emma sleep, her hand still resting protectively on her belly, her face pale and exhausted, and something in his expression cracked, just for a second. Then he turned to the director and said, "I want every piece of footage from tonight, every file, every login, and I want it in 1 hour." The director stammered, tried to explain the technical difficulties. Richard didn't blink. 1 hour? Or I'll have this hospital audited so thoroughly you'll be explaining every tongue depressor. The director left. Fast. Richard pulled up a chair beside Emma's bed. He didn't touch her, didn't wake her, just sat there, keeping watch, like he'd done this before, like he owed her something no one else understood. When Emma woke up the next morning, he was gone, but there was a note on her bedside table, handwritten, simple. "You're not alone. Stay strong." Richard Montgomery didn't believe in coincidences, and when his son Daniel married Emma 4 years ago, Richard had done his research, background checks, financial audits, everything. Emma was clean, kind, genuine, everything Daniel didn't deserve. Richard had hoped his son would grow up, that fatherhood would change him. But when Richard started hearing rumors about a mistress, about threats, about strange behavior, he knew he had to act. He hired a private investigator, former FBI, discreet, thorough, and what they uncovered made Richard's blood boil. Daniel had been transferring money to Vanessa for 8 months, thousands of dollars, luxury apartments, designer clothes, trips. But that wasn't the worst part. The investigator found emails, text messages, plans, conversations about getting rid of the problem, about making sure Emma couldn't claim anything, about manipulating medical records to make her look unstable, unfit, dangerous. And here's the part that made Richard's hands shake when he read the report. Vanessa wasn't working alone. She was being funded by someone else, someone with deeper pockets than Daniel, someone with access, influence, and a motive that went beyond simple greed. Richard pulled every string he had. He bribed hospital staff for access to deleted security footage, paid tech experts to recover corrupted files, and what he found was damning. Footage of Vanessa meeting with the hospital director 3 days before Emma's collapse. Footage of Daniel handing over Emma's medical history. Footage of a third person, a woman in her 60s, elegant, cold, sitting in a parked car outside the hospital the night Emma was admitted. Richard zoomed in on the license plate, ran it through his contacts, and his worst fear was confirmed. The woman in the car was Daniel's mother, Margaret Montgomery, Richard's ex-wife, a woman he hadn't spoken to in 20 years, a woman who'd walked away from their marriage with millions and a grudge that never healed. And now she was back, pulling strings, poisoning their son, and targeting the one person Richard had secretly tried to protect for years, because Margaret didn't just want to hurt Emma, she wanted to destroy her. And the reason? A secret Richard had buried so deep, he thought it would never surface. What? The billionaire uncovered? Destroyed reputations. Emma was released from the hospital 3 days later. Daniel finally showed up. Apologetic, tearful. He claimed he'd been in meetings, that his phone died, that he came as soon as he heard. But Emma saw through it. She saw the guilt in his eyes, the way he couldn't look at her for more than a few seconds. And when he tried to hug her, she stepped back. For the first time in their marriage, she said no. "I know about Vanessa," she said quietly. Daniel froze. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. Not now." He tried to deny it, tried to spin some story about a business associate, but Emma was done. She told him to leave, to stay with whoever he wanted, that she'd handle everything herself. And Daniel, coward that he was, left without a fight. But Emma wasn't handling this alone anymore. Richard Montgomery made sure of that. He arranged for a lawyer, a security detail, a safe place for her to stay. He didn't explain why, didn't ask for anything in return, just said, "You deserve better than this." And Emma, exhausted and heartbroken, accepted. She didn't have the energy to question it. 2 weeks later, Richard's investigator presented the full report, and it was worse than anyone imagined. Vanessa and Daniel had planned to manipulate Emma's medical records to create a paper trail showing postpartum psychosis, instability, risk to the child. The goal? To have Emma declared unfit, to take custody of the baby, and to claim Emma's inheritance from her late parents, which was held in trust until the baby's birth. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Vanessa wasn't just being funded by Margaret Montgomery. She was being blackmailed by her. Margaret had dug into Vanessa's past, found things, criminal associates, debts, a history Vanessa desperately wanted buried. So, Margaret made her an offer. Help destroy Emma, or have your past exposed. Vanessa chose survival. But she was never supposed to be the main player. She was just a pawn, a distraction, because Margaret's real target wasn't Emma's money, it was control of the Montgomery empire. And the only way to secure that was to eliminate any potential heirs that weren't directly under her influence, which meant Emma's baby had to go. Richard discovered this 2 days before Emma was scheduled to give birth. He also discovered something else, something that made him sit down in his office and pour himself a drink he hadn't touched in years. 29 years ago, Richard had a brief relationship with a woman named Catherine Grant, a kind, intelligent woman who worked as a curator at a museum. They were together for 6 months. Then Catherine disappeared. No explanation, no goodbye. Richard tried to find her, but she'd moved, changed her number, vanished. He eventually moved on, married Margaret, had Daniel, built his empire. But Catherine had a daughter she named Emma, a daughter Richard never knew about because Catherine was terrified of Margaret, who'd already been stalking Richard even before they were married. Catherine made a choice. She raised Emma alone, kept her far from the Montgomery world, and when Catherine died of cancer 8 years ago, she left Emma a letter Emma never opened, a letter Richard's investigator found in Emma's apartment, a letter that began, "My darling Emma, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and there's something you need to know about your father." Richard knew. He'd always suspected. The timeline matched, the resemblance. Emma's eyes, her smile. He'd seen it the first time Daniel brought her home, but he'd convinced himself it was coincidence, that he was seeing ghosts. But the DNA test his investigator ran without Emma's knowledge, from a coffee cup she'd discarded, confirmed it. Emma was his daughter, which meant the baby she was carrying wasn't just his grandchild, it was the only legitimate heir to his fortune. And Margaret had figured it out too. That's why she was so determined to eliminate Emma, because if the truth came out, Daniel would lose everything, and Margaret's plan to control the Montgomery empire through her son would crumble. In the courtroom, everything came crashing down. The trial was supposed to be simple. Emma filed for divorce, full custody, restraining order. But Richard Montgomery dropped a bombshell. He submitted evidence, texts, emails, financial records, security footage, medical tampering attempts, everything. The courtroom went silent. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, tried to claim the evidence was obtained illegally, but Richard's team had covered every base. Every piece of evidence was admissible, legal, devastating. Vanessa was called to the stand. She lied, claimed she barely knew Daniel, that she was just a friend. But when Richard's lawyer played a recording of Vanessa and Margaret discussing the plan to manipulate Emma's medical records, Vanessa broke. She sobbed, pointed at Margaret. "She made me do it. She threatened me. I didn't want to hurt anyone." Margaret sat stone-faced, silent, expensive suit, perfect hair, but her hands trembled slightly, the only crack in her armor. Then Daniel took the stand, and he did what cowards do. He blamed everyone but himself, said Vanessa seduced him, that his mother manipulated him, that Emma was too demanding, too emotional, that he felt trapped. The judge, a woman in her 50s who'd seen every type of human ugliness imaginable, stared at Daniel for a long moment. Then she said, "I've seen a lot of pathetic excuses in this courtroom, but yours might be the worst." She granted Emma full custody, a restraining order against Daniel, Vanessa, and Margaret, and she ordered a criminal investigation into the medical tampering. The hospital director resigned the next day. Vanessa was charged with conspiracy. Margaret faced fraud and attempted harm charges. And Daniel lost everything, his job, his reputation, his inheritance, his father, because in a private meeting after the trial, Richard Montgomery told his son something that broke whatever was left of their relationship. Emma is your half-sister. That baby she's carrying is not just your child, she's my grandchild, my true heir, and you tried to destroy her. Daniel's face went white. He tried to speak, to deny it. But Richard just handed him a folder. DNA results, Catherine's letter, everything. You're not a Montgomery anymore, Richard said quietly. You're on your own. 1 month later, Emma gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She named her Catherine, after her mother, after the woman who sacrificed everything to keep her safe. Richard was there, in the waiting room, nervous like any grandfather. And when Emma invited him in to meet his granddaughter, he cried. For the first time in decades, Richard Montgomery cried. Emma asked him why he'd done all of this, why he'd fought so hard for someone he barely knew, and that's when Richard told her the truth, showed her the letter from her mother, the DNA test, everything. Emma didn't cry. She just looked at her daughter, then at Richard, and said, "She would have liked you." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't instant family, but it was a beginning. Richard set up a trust for Emma and Catherine, made sure they'd never want for anything. But more than that, he showed up. To doctor's appointments, to birthdays, to the small, quiet moments that make up a life. He didn't try to replace Catherine Grant. He just tried to honor her memory by being the father Emma never had, and the grandfather baby Catherine deserved. The lesson? Betrayal always destroys itself. Daniel lost everything because he was too weak to choose integrity. Margaret lost her freedom because she let bitterness consume her. Vanessa lost her future because she chose shortcuts over character. But Emma survived because she refused to let cruelty define her. She chose to fight, to protect her child, to believe that somewhere, somehow, justice would prevail. And it did. Not because the system worked perfectly, but because one man chose to do the right thing, even when it cost him his son, even when it exposed his own past, even when it was hard. Truth always returns. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it arrives in a hospital hallway at 2 in the morning, but it always comes back. And when it does, it doesn't care about money or status or carefully constructed lies. It just shines light into the dark places people tried to hide. Strength comes from the unexpected. Emma thought she was alone, powerless, defeated. But strength found her, in a nurse who refused to look away, in a billionaire who chose to be a father, in her own heart, which refused to break even when everything else did. And family? Family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's revealed in the fire, in the moments when everything is burning down and someone chooses to stand with you anyway. Richard Montgomery wasn't Emma's father for 29 years, but he became one when it mattered most. And that's the thing about redemption. It's never too late, never impossible. It just requires the courage to face what you've lost and the humility to accept what you can still save. So now I want to ask you something. What would you have done in Emma's place? Would you have trusted Richard? Would you have let him into your daughter's life? Or would the betrayal have been too much? Would you have walked away from everything and started over somewhere? No one knew your name? There's no right answer, just honest ones. And I want to hear yours. Drop it in the comments. And what about Richard? Do you think he was right to reveal the truth? To tell Emma she was his daughter even though it meant destroying his relationship with his son? Some people say he should have stayed silent, that he caused more pain than healing. Others say he did the only honorable thing. What do you think? Was it justice or just more damage? Should Daniel face jail time? He didn't physically hurt anyone, but he conspired to manipulate medical records, to destroy his wife's mental health, to take her child. Where's the line between cruel and criminal? Tell me where you stand. How would you feel if this happened to you? If the person you loved, the person you built a life with, conspired with his own mother to erase you, to make you look crazy, to take your child, could you forgive that? Could you move forward? Or would rage consume everything? I think that's what makes Emma so remarkable. She didn't let hatred win. She fought for her daughter, for herself, but she didn't become the villain in someone else's story. That takes a kind of strength most of us never have to find, and I hope you never do. But if you ever face betrayal like this, I hope you remember Emma, and I hope you fight. Before you go, if you think this story was unbelievable, wait until you hear what happened when a nanny uncovered a billionaire's darkest secret. A secret that involved 3 countries, a missing fortune, and a child who was never supposed to exist. That story drops next week, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about Emma's story. Thank you for believing that truth matters, because it does. Even when it's painful, even when it's complicated, even when it takes 29 years to surface, truth always matters, and so do you.